everybody, and welcome back to the United Stand. I am live with Ben Jacobs, transfer expert and journalist, giving us all the latest Manchester United news and transfer news. And it is the B&B show. It's good to be back, Ben.
We've come in black and white today. People might think it's a Newcastle podcast.
Oh, hopefully not. Hopefully not. I mean, we will touch a little bit on Newcastle at some point, just in terms of the fact that some transfers maybe are competitive with them. But how are you?
Yeah. Everything is good. Back home in Edinburgh after a little trip to Lisbon as well. And then, spoiler alert, I'll be out in Washington for the World Cup draw in a couple of weeks. So fantastic to see Scotland qualify so dramatically, especially as somebody that lives up here.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. Scott McTominay doing us proud over for Scotland, getting them to the World Cup. I mean, it was fantastic. That goal was just incredible. I was just saying to you off air, I can imagine that they're still singing Scott McTominay's name up there. But no, great to have you on the show. Yeah. We've got loads to discuss. Semenyo, Guehi, midfield options, Baleba, and your question as well, and more topics that I can't just roll off the tongue, but they're all written down here and ready to ask Ben about. But starting off, Ben, getting into the juicy stuff, I want to ask you about this story that has been going round. So, Semenyo, release clause, first 2 weeks of January. You have spoken about this before, 65 million if I am correct. Yeah. And Manchester United having previous interest in him. And Fabrizio Romano did say recently on his show that United want a winger/number 10. So my question to you would be, are United in the race for Semenyo in January? And are we actually after another winger/number 10?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is there is the release clause, as we revealed on Talk Sport. And then, of course, The Athletic and David Ornstein in particular put a number on it. And that is 65 million, but it's actually 60 plus 5 million in add-ons. And as you rightly say, it's valid for give or take the first half of the window to allow Bournemouth the possibility of maybe finding a replacement. And of course, very importantly, Semenyo will not be one of the players going to AFCON, and several clubs may lose players and see value in triggering or even matching on different terms that clause. And this was something the Semenyo side, when they extended over the summer, stipulated there must be 2 release clauses, one to give them an out in January and then a diminished number over the summer. And it will be interesting to see whether the player is still happy to wait until the summer, whether clubs feel anybody is going to trigger it in the first 2 weeks in January. And I do think that there will be suitors, or if everyone's going to wait for the slightly lower number. So we need to be alert for Semenyo and his future, probably not just in the first 2 weeks of January, but in the build-up as well. Because you may remember when Man United signed Matheus Cunha, they basically had it all agreed and were ready to trigger the clause before the window even opened. And I think a lot of people will be trying to get ahead of the market. Are Manchester United interested? Yes. Were they interested over the course of the summer? Yes, as well. Are Manchester United going to do what some have asked me, which is convert him into a left wing back? I'm not so sure. And even though there is that bonus of being able to utilise him there, I think the player is very intent on being a winger. That's where all of his form is. So I think if Manchester United move, it will be because they can add another winger/number 10. And the reason why they'll be open to a winger, not so much a number 10, but the versatility as a bonus, is just because at the moment anyway, maybe it changes during the summer, Bryan and Mbeumo can play centrally. Matheus Cunha is central or number 9. So there is scope to add a wider player who will not necessarily compete for that central spot if everybody is fit and available, but it helps. And if Benjamin Šeško is injured or out of form, Cunha seemingly at the moment is the deputy. If Bruno Fernandes is playing deeper, there is room and the possibility that someone could come in as a 10. But I think the first priority is less winger 10 and more just an out-and-out specialist wide player that is devastating on the counter-attack. And Semenyo falls into that category. And obviously the other versatility is just a bonus. Liverpool, I think, are going to be ones to watch as well, especially as they look for a long-term succession plan for Mo Salah. And I think it's fair to say that Arsenal could be a club that enter the race as well. Tottenham will be spoken about, and are another suitor that explored a move for around £50 million over the summer. So Semenyo's most likely destination is within the Premier League. And I think we may see a mad race, because even though the number's higher in January rather than the summer, a lot of people will look at his form and maybe have urgency mid-season and might be prepared to pull the trigger. But I think for Manchester United, they'll be quite relaxed if he just stays at Bournemouth, because they may feel better positioned to make a move, financially speaking, in the summer rather than pay the higher number mid-season.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that you talk about that, because I've been doing the morning shows this week because Marc's been away in New York, loving it. And the Semenyo stuff's come out, and I've had people in the community say, but why would we go for Semenyo? We've already got Mbeumo, we've already got Cunha. And I was saying exactly what you said there. If Šeško isn't starting up front, it's usually Cunha. He doesn't tend to go to Zirkzee. And even sometimes he'll opt for Cunha up front over Benjamin Šeško. So if you've got a player like Semenyo who can play all across the front three, it's a real benefit. And like you said, you know, out-and-out wingers, you've got Ahmad, but he's playing it right wing back. And then if you look past that, yeah, Mbeumo, but we've got no one on the left that's really like an out-and-out winger. So I think it'd be a great addition for our front line, considering, you know, it literally is only Benjamin Šeško who's the out-and-out number 9. So if you're playing that versatile type forward, I think Mbeumo can play there, you know, Cunha can play there. I think it does make sense. So I like the idea of it personally, but he
can play both sides as well. And it is true, in theory, he can play deeper. It's just about the pitch, because as you can imagine, if Liverpool are going, you're going to be our long-term succession planning out wide on whatever side they choose. And if you're Tottenham and you say we've got a clear defined role where you're going to be doing what you do at Bournemouth, and then if you're any other club that can basically just give him that continuity, whether in January or the summer, and then if you're Man United and you're saying we're quite well stocked everywhere, so we might use you in one of 3 positions, that can kind of weaken your pitch a little bit. So my understanding is that everybody that is interested in Semenyo wants Semenyo how he is playing now, and nobody is thinking about converting him dramatically. But of course, we know that the versatility is always a great option if you pick up injuries, if ultimately players are out of form. But the 10 in particular, I wouldn't classify that position as how Manchester United, if they move, would see Semenyo, because Cunha and Mbeumo were told both you're signed as 10s, even if they're used in other positions. Mason Mount would obviously see himself as a 10, and we know that Ruben Amorim likes him, and Bruno Fernandes, even from a deeper position, likes to get in the 10 as well. So it's very much a winger that I think Manchester United are looking for, but if they can play in more than one position, of course, that's a bonus.
And then just a quick follow-up before we move on that. You talk about how Manchester United be quite relaxed waiting for the summer to spend the money then. Like you said previously, if it is going to be stiff competition, some clubs might want to just pay the extra because of how good he is, and to make sure that they get him in January and take advantage of that opportunity. But we've spoken before on the show about United potentially pulling back money from the summer budget to spend in January. Could that be an option? And plus, I think about a player like Semenyo, and if he helps you get into the top 5 Champions League money, it could be a boost for then the summer budget as well.
Yeah, I think budget-wise, they're relatively relaxed because certain amortization costs drop off into the next 3-year cycle. In the long run, it may be. There's a debate, of course, over UEFA squad cost control measure and shadow trialling anchoring, which has had some pushback from some of the major agencies and also the Professional Footballers Association. But we don't know what the financial landscape will have going forwards. So I think Manchester United would not be put off by a mid-season outlay, taking budget from the summer, especially if they're on course for some kind of European football. But it's more about value, because if nobody was to come in for Semenyo at the 65 million number, then nobody has to move. Player might say he'd prefer to do the full season with Bournemouth, knowing he can take his pick of clubs in the summer when his release clause is lower and he knows exactly what everyone's got. So that's the kind of scenario one, same as Liam Delap, who basically said to everybody in January, even though it was obvious he would leave Ipswich, I'd rather wait until the summer, take my pick of clubs and know who's got Champions League football and who hasn't. In the case of Cunha, even in the January, though he didn't get that move at the time, it was obvious he had a club, Manchester United, in mind. So that's the most fascinating thing. Don't just look at this in terms of the release clause, look at this in terms of the pitch to Semenyo. Because yes, it might be a mad race and it might be a domino effect where one club triggers the clause and then 3 or 4 go, well, we've got to do the same thing. And if Man United chose to move and another club triggered the clause, then I'm told there's nothing financially that would stop them mid-season doing that move. But flip it, an equally likely possibility is that clubs are pitching to Semenyo now going, pick us. And imagine if Semenyo turned around and went, I definitely want Man United or I definitely want Liverpool. Then it completely flips and the clause isn't as relevant because you might persuade the player to wait for you and do the deal at whatever time and whatever price and whatever terms you like. So this is what makes it such an interesting story because not that much time left before the clause becomes active. Plenty of clubs will be hoping they can convince Semenyo on their project, whether they trigger it in January or the summer. And yet if one club does trigger it, maybe Bournemouth go, we want to cash in at the higher number. Maybe the player changes his mind and has his head turned. So this is going to be one of the stories of January, I think, whether Semenyo stays or whether Semenyo goes. And I do think there's a possibility that Manchester United could be there. But I also think, like I said before, we need to keep an eye on Liverpool in particular, but also maybe Arsenal and possibly still Spurs.
Some good clubs in line there for Semenyo's signature potentially, but it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out, like you just said. Just quickly, do we know what the fee would be in the summer for the release clause?
We don't know the exact number, and we have to kind of respect the fact that sources I spoke to anyway didn't really want to reveal the number at all. But slowly but surely, these things get out there. So when we broke there was a release clause, we did so without giving the number, but we had a fair idea of what it might be. Now the 65 is out. And remember, that is including add-ons. As far as I'm aware, the summer number is still above 50 million, but it does drop from 65 and it may even go below the 60 million number as well. So it will diminish. And in the summer, the clause is valid for at least the lion's share of that summer window, as opposed to only the first part or a specific and very small number of days. Interesting.
Let's see what happens. That's going to be a really good transfer.
It's going to be a big story for 2026. And deservedly so, because his form is incredible. He's a great character. He's liked within the dressing room. So it's not just about what he offers on the field as well. And he'll be a good fit at a big club, most likely within the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, just off the back of that, I'll stay on forward players for Manchester United. There was reports and rumours that United wanted to sign a forward player, potentially even a striker, to give Benjamin Šeško maybe a little bit of help and add a little bit of depth. Does that mean that United could be looking to offload Joshua Zirkzee? And is there any other strikers that we're linked to?
It's still difficult for Joshua Zirkzee because Manchester United value him as a squad player. And it's hard to sign somebody mid-season knowing that they'll likely come in as a number 2, if not a number 3, in the rankings of number 9. Because if Benjamin Šeško is fit, a lot of investment put behind him. If he's rotated or out of form, I still think you get a situation where Cunha is next in line. And then over the course of a long season, is Chido Obi going to come back into the mix as well? And I think Manchester United are really keen not to stifle his pathway. So January and number 9s for Manchester United, perhaps less likely, unless, as you say, Joshua Zirkzee gets a move away. But Man United are not looking to do any favours to the Netherlands national team or Zirkzee with his international chances in mind. So if they can't find the right kind of number 9, or they just don't want to move mid-season, then Zirkzee will simply stay. But you've kind of got 2 separate points here. The first is Man United not prioritising a number 9 mid-season compared to the summer. And the second is Joshua Zirkzee trying to put it top of the agenda by asking for more game time. And that's where somebody might try their luck. West Ham United in particular from the Premier League, possibly Roma, if Evan Ferguson goes back to Brighton. And naturally, if Zirkzee gets a tangible offer, then does he put pressure on Manchester United? And in a situation where Man United change their mind and say, okay, we're going to begrudgingly sanction a Zirkzee exit, that's where they might say, okay, we do need another striker. So it's quite a fluid situation, but it wouldn't remotely surprise me if Zirkzee has to fight very hard to get an exit, and if Manchester United prioritise other positions mid-season. Then at the end of the season, let's see whether they say Benjamin Šeško wants a more experienced number 9 that is a more short-termist approach, or do you go kind of young again? And that's where you look at a profile like Etta Ayong, also linked with Barcelona and Real Madrid. But I come back to what I said before. Finding another young striker when Benjamin Šeško is young and when Chido Obi is at the club, they'll have to understand, can all of the young profiles coexist? Or is the pathway and development of Chido Obi in particular stifled by going down that younger striker route? So at the moment, it's quite quiet on the number 9 front. And I think if Zirkzee is to get his move away, then he'll have to push relatively hard, because we know that Ruben Amorim would rather keep him in order to protect squad depth.
Nice one, thank you. And then just to kind of stick with the January talk regarding targets there, João Gomes is a name that keeps coming up. I know we spoke about him a little bit before, but could that be a potential move that Man United could make or wants to make in January?
Yeah, they like João Gomes. I've mentioned him before, even dating back to the summer. And I think at the time I first reported João Gomes, people were like, wait a minute, why is there a link? Because he'd only recently signed a new deal. But now we're seeing the name re-emerge again. And there's probably only 2 targets on the Manchester United list that are definitively, I would say, available during the month of January, or potentially available. The first is obviously Conor Gallagher. We've spoken about him before, so I won't repeat much there, but it all depends on Atletico Madrid and if they soften their stance on maybe a loan with an option to buy. And even though Conor Gallagher has said publicly he's quite happy in Spain, we know that he may have to move in order to get enough game time to try and force his way into Thomas Tuchel's England plans, which will not be easy. So at the right price, or if Atleti change their position on a straight loan or a loan with an option to buy, Gallagher could be a name that becomes available. And then you have João Gomes, who I wouldn't, and I want to be clear here, say is available. But what I would say is that suitors may be encouraged to try their luck in January, looking at the league table, because obviously from Wolves' perspective, were they to go down, the price that they would get in the summer going down with João Gomes would be less than maybe people would be prepared to offer mid-season. So it's still tough, because if you're Rob Edwards and you walk into that job, the first thing you're going to say to Jeff Shee and your board is, you cannot sell Jurgen Strand-Larsen and João Gomes mid-season, but let's see whether somebody out of opportunism tries their luck. And I think there will be suitors that think it's not impossible that Wolves would entertain an offer if their league position stays as is between now and towards the end of the January window. And then all the other midfielders, your Angelo Stillers, your Elliot Andersons, your Carlos Balebas, your Adam Whartons, for me anyway, unless anything dramatic changes, those are summer sagas.
And then there was a link this morning, and I know you've spoken about it before, so I just wanted to know if it was still relevant. So Ruben Neves.
Yeah, Ruben Neves, I think, is harder now, because it looks like the direction of travel is about extending his time in Saudi Arabia. And there's a lot of sources that feel that he'll follow the path of Milinkovic-Savic and commit his future. Whether or not that means that he stays for the duration of any extension remains to be seen. But the point of Ruben Neves, when we spoke about it last, was more kind of towards the end of the summer, when the player was debating, did he want to go into this season still in Saudi Arabia in a World Cup year, or was he prepared to leave? And then once the summer window shut, it was kind of about, are Al Hilal going to find themselves heading into 2026 another important name in his position, and might that open the door to something opportunistic mid-season in the form of a loan? But it looks like now Al Hilal are going to prioritise a centre-back, possibly a goalkeeper and a right winger, and they're going to keep their midfield intact. And I actually think compared to when we last spoke, there's less opportunism and there's less likelihood that anybody is going to get Ruben Neves out of Saudi Arabia, even heading into a World Cup year, because his place in the national team squad is fixed. So being in Saudi Arabia is not detrimental. And I think from Neves's point of view, therefore, he's going to stay focused on Al Hilal. And it wouldn't surprise me if he actually ends up, after all of this, signing a new deal.
Yeah, I thought that would be the case, but I just thought I'd touch on it because he is a name that has been linked to us before, and the Portuguese connection to Ruben Amorim as well, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they like him, but it's about, can you realistically get him? And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's actually less likely now than it was when we last spoke about him.
Yeah, the wages high as well. I next want to ask you, so many people asking me in the comment section, and I am going to get to it because I'm really eager to know about this as well. And it is about Marc Guéhi, Ben. So a few journalists have linked us to Marc Guéhi, saying, yeah, OK, Liverpool are the favourites, but Manchester United well could enter that race. Is that something Manchester United are looking at?
Yeah, I think for the summer. So the feeling is that in January, Marc Guéhi naturally can be available because Palace can cash in a fee, but there's a lot of variables. They'd have to find a replacement. And remember, it only fell through for Liverpool because Igor did a medical at Crystal Palace and then decided to join West Ham from Brighton, and that derailed the Marc Guéhi deal. So Oliver Glasner's position is the same in January. If Marc Guéhi was to be sold mid-season, he would have to find a replacement. And from Guehi's point of view, with Harry Maguire not starting every single week and with Levi Colwill injured, he may feel staying at Crystal Palace, play the World Cup, have a starting spot potentially, and then take his pick of clubs as a free agent is also more preferable. So there's a few moving parts here. And we have to see whether any club feels that jumping ahead of the market is a necessity compared to waiting for that free agency battle. So the first point I think I would make is it's just not a given that Marc Guéhi will go anywhere in January. And even Liverpool, who many believe are the favourites, and with reasonable justification as well, they may choose not to bid too. So people are assuming, because Giovanni Leone got injured, that Liverpool will bid in January. It could happen, but if it does, it will kind of be a U-turn from Liverpool, because sources said after the Leone injury that they may wait also until the summer. So I'm sure we'll get a lot of headlines about Marc Guéhi. We might even get offers for Guéhi in January, but don't be entirely surprised if it becomes a big scramble for free agency. And if that's the case, then I think from Manchester United's point of view, they would be remiss not to explore that because he'd be such good value. But it will all depend upon things like, do they have Champions League football? Can they match the wage that Liverpool were offering him? And the reason why Liverpool are favourites is because Guehi was sold on the move to Liverpool. It fell through due to circumstances outside of his control, and that's still there in his head. I wouldn't discount La Liga's big clubs either. Everyone's talking about Real Madrid and Ibrahima Konate, and Barcelona, and a player like Upamecano, who maybe is more likely to just extend the move at this stage. But don't be surprised if La Liga clubs and Guehi, and even Bryan and Guehi, force themselves into the conversation as well. So for Manchester United and Guehi, not much to get excited about yet. Yes, they like him. Yes, they see there's value there, but I don't see them bidding for Marc Guéhi in January, and then come the free agency market, if that's what happens with Guehi, I think it will be a bit like Liam Delap, where they'd have to be able to pitch Marc Guéhi regular starting spot and likely Champions League football. And without those two ingredients, I think there'll be other clubs ahead of Manchester United in the race for Marc Guéhi, and Liverpool will be one of them. Yeah,
it'll be a really tough battle if we did decide to enter that race. And sometimes when United don't feel like they're going to win a race, they don't enter it. I've noticed that in the past. But, I mean, personally, for me, a club like Manchester United should absolutely be there. I think, like you said, I'm not surprised that top La Liga clubs would be interested in him. I'm not surprised about top clubs in the Premier League would be interested in him. He's such a good player. And I'd love him at United, but I know it'll be really tough considering our situation. But you never know, Champions League football, we might feel like we have a chance.
Yeah, and also it is Manchester United, so you can't discount the fact that Cunha and Mbeumo join without Champions League football. But I think Marc Guéhi, if it is summer he leaves, will be able to take his pick of clubs. And that's important because he can get the wage he's looking for. He can get the type of European football that he wants. He can get a starting spot. And that's the only thing, obviously, that goes against Liverpool in a scenario where Ibrahima Konate extends and doesn't go to Real Madrid. And obviously, Virgil van Dijk extended for 2 years last season. Marc Guéhi may look at that and say, how often am I going to play from day one? And of course, if that's January, when Konate will still be there regardless, it's thought, because I don't think we're going to see a mid-season move for Konate. He'll either extend at Liverpool or the contract will run down. So obviously in January, if Liverpool bid for Marc Guéhi and Konate and Virgil van Dijk were still there, Marc Guéhi may say, am I playing ahead of one of those two players in order to play regularly in the build-up to the World Cup? Otherwise, Harry Maguire's in contention. Levi Colwill will be back from injury. So if that scenario emerges, Guehi could turn around to Liverpool and say, let's pre-agree it for the summer, or let's see what the summer brings, and I'll listen to all suitors and I'll just keep playing at Crystal Palace between now and the end of the season. So I think people are making a lot of conclusions about Marc Guéhi without really understanding the finesse, that you've got the Glasner factor. He's adamant that if Palace are to back him, he needs a replacement or Guehi's to wind down his contract. You got the Guehi perspective, which is also with the World Cup in mind. And then you've got the fact that come summer, if Guehi does nothing, he can take his pick of several clubs. And of course, you then have suitors that say, how can we defend ourselves against that mad scramble? And can we force all parties into an agreement earlier? And we wait and see, given the complexities, whether anything is possible, therefore, mid-season.
Okay, we'll have to wait and see. And then I wanted to touch on this topic because I've seen it floating around a bit as well. And it is that Baleba could still be Manchester United's top midfield target for the summer. Would you say that he's still most likely to be Manchester United's top target for the summer?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a top target because they want two midfielders, as I broke a few months ago and now is wildly reported. So we are not necessarily looking at one particular name as their all or nothing. Two elite, potentially starting midfielders are likely to come in. And from the list, if we only look at the summer names, I think Baleba is very high in their thinking, but it could still be price dependent. And what we know, and this is the good news for Manchester United fans, is if Man United agree a deal with Brighton, Carlos Baleba wants Manchester United. And personally, I think it would be a big surprise if two clubs, one Man United and one a rival, agree a fee with Brighton. I think it would be unlikely that Carlos Baleba would pick that other club over Manchester United. And this is why they did the legwork last summer, even though it didn't lead to anything, because they now know that Carlos Baleba wants to join Manchester United. So that's the good news. The bad news might be price and not being able to agree a deal with Brighton or getting outbid by another club. So yes, short answer, not that I ever really give one, but he is very high in Manchester United's thinking. And they're not perturbed by his form at the moment because they feel that some of that is down to injury and some of that is down to the uncertainty and almost having his head turned over the summer by the possibility that he could leave Brighton. What I would say, though, is that in addition to Baleba and on a par with Baleba, Angelo Stiller is also extremely high in Manchester United's thinking as well, and is backed and liked by both Jason Wilcox and Christopher Vivell. And then you just have to look at the other names like Adam Wharton and Elliot Anderson that are obviously potentially quite hard to get. If Elliot Anderson has a phenomenal World Cup, there might be several clubs coming in for him. If Adam Wharton signs a new deal at Crystal Palace, he's a lot harder to get in the summer as well. So it's not just about who they want, it's who's feasible, and that is not always in their control. And then they have to look at the collective budget of if they sign a Baleba, Wharton signs a new deal, and then that needs astronomical money. They may go, okay, there's better value in going Baleba and somebody a little bit cheaper. So people want a 1 and 2 or a top target and a second target, but we're too early for that at the moment because of the variables that I've outlined. But I think if you were going on your football manager and basically going, who can we just sign without any of these variables? I think Manchester United would probably be going Baleba and Stiller or Baleba and Anderson at this point in a dream world. But they might go Gallagher or João Gomes and find that they can get them a little bit cheaper, and that might create the budget to break a British transfer record for one of the other players that I've mentioned.
Yeah, my top one's Elliot Anderson personally. I rate him so highly, but I think you've mentioned some really, really talented midfielders there, and it's good that Manchester United are linked to them sort of players, because I know Angelo Stiller plays in the Bundesliga, so it's not as if people are watching him in the Premier League every week, but a lot of people have been able to look at Angelo Stiller since he's been linked to Manchester United, or even beforehand, and he's clearly got a lot of quality. So
yeah.
It's good
and
to be linked to them
don't
players.
Discount Newcastle in the conversation for Elliot
I said we speak about Newcastle.
And I think what people don't understand about the Elliot Anderson deal is that this was a kid that was Newcastle through and through and did not want to leave Newcastle United and was basically forced out due to PSR. So what actually happened originally was that Liverpool agreed a deal for Anthony Gordon, and Jarrell Quansah was going to go the other way. And it was all lined up because Newcastle realised that they needed a large amount of money to come in very quickly. And then at the last minute, Kobbie Mainoo went to Brighton and Nottingham Forest came in for Elliot Anderson. And the collective incomings in terms of fee allowed Newcastle to pull the plug on the Anthony Gordon to Liverpool deal. And Elliot Anderson was reluctantly told, you've got to go. And it was done at such super speed on the Newcastle side that they couldn't even work in a buyback clause or anything like that. But Elliot Anderson's love for Newcastle, his affinity with that football club hasn't gone away. It's not to say that he wouldn't see appeal in joining Manchester United or another club, but there is definitely that pre-existing connection with Newcastle. And Elliot Anderson felt like before he was forced out due to PSR, he might be at Newcastle United for a long, long time. And now you've got Ross Wilson, who's the sporting director at Newcastle, who was the sporting director that did the deal that brought him to Nottingham Forest. And I think from Newcastle's point of view, if they felt that they could get Elliot Anderson at value, they would still be open to re-signing him, despite the fact that they got Joe Linton, they got Bruno Guimaraes, they got Sandro Tonali, Sean Longstaff left, there's room for another midfielder. So they might be in the conversation as well. But I think there's a long way to go in the Elliot Anderson saga, simply because by the time he gets to the summer and by the time he likely plays at the World Cup, and by the time we know if Man United and Newcastle have got Champions League football, and by the time we know whether Nottingham Forest can get themselves out of trouble, all of these things will play a part in how this Elliot Anderson saga ends come summer.
For sure, because I look at it as if I am, but I look at it as being like a massive Manchester United fan, and if I was in that situation, you talk about it being Newcastle through and through, like it is an affinity that you have for that club. However, if United are there offering Champions League football, I'm not saying we will get it, but if we get it, Newcastle haven't had the best start to the season, and of course, Manchester United is one of the biggest clubs in the league. It can be convincing. You mentioned about wanting to play European football, but also with Manchester United, you're going to come in, you're going to be a starter. Like you are going to be a starter.
That's the main point.
Yeah, with Newcastle, they've got a very, very good midfield. However, when you've got that love for a club, that can break everything and kind of it can be them rose-tinted glasses for you. But we'll have to see, because like you said, I think European football is a big thing for him, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a strange situation as well, because unfortunately for Anderson, if he wanted to go back to Newcastle, you got Sandro Tonali, who's now one of the most outstanding midfielders in the Premier League. You still got Bruno Guimaraes. In theory, you can move Joe Linton into a front three in a 4-3-3, and that does free up a midfield spot. And maybe from Newcastle's point of view, they don't care because they feel you sign Elliot Anderson as a starter. I think you have to pitch to Anderson if you want Anderson. He is a starter and indisputably so. I don't think he would rejoin Newcastle or any other club as a squad player. But I just think with that particular potential transfer, there's a long, long way to go. And how firm and how aggressive in keeping Elliot Anderson Forest can be will be determined by a number of different factors. One of them, of course, will be what division they're in next season. And similarly, from Manchester United's point of view, the kind of outlay that they spend over the summer will be determined by, do they get Champions League football, and also outgoings? And were they, for example, to sign Carlos Baleba for a British transfer record, and then any of these other midfielders, most of the spend required would take the total on just two players to potentially around the 200 million mark, if not more. And spending that may be contingent, like I say, on Champions League football, but also outgoings as well. So is Bruno Fernandes sold for a significant number? Is Casemiro not extended and his wage comes off the books? So there is a bit of a juggling act. And I understand why when we come on podcasts as journalists, people just want a new answer every single week. But it is really important to understand that Manchester United won't know the lay of the land either for the summer or potentially January until a few more weeks, if not a few more months, simply because it's dependent on all of these aspects. How likely they are to get European football, how confident they are of commercial revenue, which has always been a good thing for the club, and what they genuinely feel is going to happen with some of these exits, which could potentially double the summer budget. Because if it is Casemiro's wage off the books, Bruno Fernandes to depart, Kobbie Mainoo to be sold for pure profit, if they sanction a Joshua Zirkzee exit, then of course they're in the ballpark if they get Champions League football coupled with all of that, where they can spend a significant amount of money, potentially the same kind of money that we've seen the likes of Chelsea, Liverpool and Arsenal spend in previous windows. But to do all of that, it requires a lot of movement, and some of the directions of travel we won't know until potentially January or even later in the year.
Yeah, and on direction of movement, I do want to ask you about Kobbie Mainoo, but just before that, I did see some links of Tchouaméni this morning. Manchester United being interested in Tchouaméni. Have you heard anything about that? Because to me, I thought it sounded a little bit far-fetched, but I wanted to ask you on the show because, I mean, I've always liked Tchouaméni and I think he's a really good midfielder, but I'd be surprised if United were going for him in the summer after all the other names have been linked to, but I just wanted to ask you.
Yeah, Tchouaméni's always said that he is happy at Real Madrid. We've heard speculation before, and a lot of people will kind of feel a player like that profile-wise could come and then Casemiro would depart because they're relatively similar, I think it's fair to say. But Real Madrid sources have been adamant that even for maybe 100 million euros, they're not prepared to sell. So I do think it would be a surprise if he ended up joining a club. January feels entirely off the table, and I think summer is unlikely as well. And some people ask me sometimes, aren't Real Madrid looking for a midfielder? And we've heard links in recent weeks, for example, with Enzo Fernandes, but Tchouaméni and Enzo Fernandes are not necessarily like for like, unless Real Madrid were to buy a player like Enzo Fernandes, and that of course is contingent on Chelsea selling anyway, and I think that highly unlikely in the short or the medium term future. But Enzo Fernandes seems to relish playing as an 8, if not a 10, even though he can play as a 6 or an 8. So even if Tchouaméni was to be sold and Real were thinking about another player, there's no like-for-like replacement for him that I'm aware they're looking at this stage, because the kind of midfielders that Real Madrid have on their radar seem to be more like 8s who can get into the 10 position rather than 6 that can get into the 8 position. So I'm not sure this one has legs. Of course, several top clubs appreciate Tchouaméni, but every time I've made an inquiry on Tchouaméni, dating back to last summer and the January before. I've been told by those close to the player he doesn't want to leave Real Madrid. And I've been told by those in the Real Madrid camp that even if someone put down 100-odd million euros, they're also not prepared to sell.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I really like the player, and we've been linked to him quite a few times, even before he went to Real Madrid, but I can see him staying there. But I just wanted to ask you about it, so thank you for clarity on that and some good insight there. I want to ask you about Kobbie Mainoo now. Has there been any more talks about his future during this international break? Because he's not away with England, which is where he'd want to be. He is still training at Manchester United, and I can assume he's hoping to get some game time in this busy period coming up to the Christmas time, the festive period when it comes to the Premier League. But has there been any more conversations about his future? And I've seen some links to Napoli as well.
Yeah, we know Napoli had tried over the summer, but to no great degree, but they'd had some conversations, and obviously West Ham are the other club to watch that would be interested in Kobbie Mainoo if a mid-season loan presents itself. And I think we're exactly where we were in the summer, where Kobbie Mainoo will head into the January window with not enough game time for his liking or for his England chances, and will go back again to Manchester United and ask them whether they might now be prepared to sanction a loan to get him minutes. Mainoo's position is he loves Manchester United. In a dream world, he'd be playing and he would sign a new deal, but he has to be realistic. And that's where the kind of middle ground from Mainoo's perspective of getting a loan and then all parties reassessing in the summer comes from. And I think if you're Mainoo, you will remake an argument that was made in the summer period, and that is that several players leave Man United and thrive. And as we've seen with Scott McTominay and to an extent with Rasmus Højlund, when they go away and instantly get minutes, a lot of people turn their head and go, we quite like them back at the football club. And from what I'm told in the summer, the Mainoo camp, without giving specific names, made that argument that there's a long history of Man United players going out, sometimes permanently, and then doing really well. And is there therefore regret that they were not given more opportunities at Old Trafford? And I think Mainoo actually wants to go out on loan only to put himself into the shop window to show Manchester United he's worth persisting with. But Manchester United aren't going to do that and weaken their midfield depth further unless another name comes through the door. So Kobbie Mainoo, I think, will face quite a nervous January. And it could well be that if he is to be loaned out and get his wish, he has to be patient, and it happens right at the end of the window if Manchester United find another midfielder. So Manchester United know why Mainoo wants to go out on loan, but again, they're not going to do England or Mainoo any favours if it's at the detriment of their own midfield depth. And this is why there's no guarantee still that Kobbie Mainoo is going to get his wish mid-season. But if he is to get a loan, then Napoli could come back. They certainly liked Mainoo over the summer. Newcastle held a historic interest, but they can't give Mainoo the game time. So even if they were to make an approach, I don't think Kobbie Mainoo would accept that, because he wouldn't necessarily break immediately into that midfield, and West Ham could still be another club to watch.
We'll have to see what happens. I hope he gets that loan move. Personally, I know as a United fan, you should be sat here saying we need as much depth as possible to get us through until the summer, but I agree with the argument that Mainoo's can't put forward. Like, go and let him play football, show what he's about, and give him a chance for next season under Amorim.
Well, imagine if you loan him on the 30th of January, let's just call it, and then 2-3 days later, Casemiro pulls his hamstring and Bruno Fernandes does his ACL. That was a little bit of a dark injury, I know. But
Touch wood, that doesn't happen.
They pick up injuries for a month or two.
I get that.
Then you're suddenly turning around if you haven't replaced Kobbie Mainoo and you've just pacified him by sending him out on loan, feeling like you don't have those deep-lying options. So I can understand why Manchester United, if they find a midfielder in January, a Conor Gallagher, a João Gomes, may be more understanding of Mainoo's situation. But if no midfielder arrives in January, it's hard to think how Kobbie Mainoo is going to get an exit.
We'll have to wait and see. Let's see what happens. Lastly, Ben, I've got so many people asking me to ask you this. Muñoz and what he spoke about during the international break. He'd love to join a big club and name drop Manchester United. Is there absolutely anything there?
Who was the name, sorry?
Muñoz from Crystal Palace.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think Crystal Palace's perspective is once again that they want to hold on to all of their best players, at least until the summer, and then they'll reassess because you've got this sort of Glasner factor. But as you say, the player came out and said he'd love to move to a big club, and Manchester United was name dropped. So it's clear that he is thinking about his next move. I still think that it's unlikely anything will happen in January. That's my feeling, speaking to sources, not just in relation to Manchester United, but in relation to any club. But the summer might be a different story. And it is an area and a position where Manchester United are looking to strengthen. But make no mistake, Steve Parish is one of the toughest negotiators in the business. And several Palace players are going to be in demand. I think Mateta's probably the most likely to put pen to paper. I don't know exactly when, but I think he's perfectly happy extending, so he'll be difficult to get. Then Wharton may sign a new deal, but with a kind of caveat that there might be a clause in there. And then with Muñoz, I think he does feel that he's kind of due a move. And the key difference there compared to a player like Adam Wharton is his age. So obviously, there may be only one big chance, maybe summer 2026. And then you get to an age where clubs are less inclined to move. And from Manchester United's perspective, I'm told they're not against signing a slightly older player with a bit more experience. You look on the other side, I've mentioned it before, at Anthony Robinson, another player that's a bit older and has been discussed in the past by Manchester United. So this one could gather legs. I'm not aware at this stage of any Man United approach, of any Man United talks. But what I do think is whether it's a left wing back or whether it's a right wing back, Manchester United will not be afraid to take the same tactic as they did with both Bryan and Mbeumo and Matheus Cunha and buy somebody with a lot of Premier League experience. And I don't think there's an age limit that would stop Manchester United making a move for an informed player with the Premier League experience that Muñoz has got. But have there been any talks yet? Has there been any movement for January, or is there a chance that he could exit mid-season? At the moment, I would have to say no to all three of those questions.
Just speaking a little bit about players on the older side, and then I will let you go because I know you've got something you've got to get to. But Harry Maguire, have the contract negotiations stalled? Is it looking unlikely now? Because the more it goes on, the more it seems like maybe that contract might not be there. I'm not sure. I wanted to ask you on it.
Really, it's just the case that the Maguire side engaged in initial talks, as I reported probably 6 weeks ago, and it's Man United that are the roadblock, not Maguire, because Manchester United is still deciding what they want to do and or what kind of contract they are prepared to offer Maguire. And I think that's normal because Maguire's perspective is he'd like clarity before the end of the year. So the January window opens and he knows if he has to look at clubs or if he can settle his future. And if he settles his future, then he can focus on Man United and trying to get into the World Cup squad. But again, Manchester United can do it at this stage anyway on their own timescale. They won't want to get into a situation like David De Gea where the contract expires and nobody knows where they stand. But Manchester United don't have to rush it because they're not thinking about the World Cup. So at this stage, it's Manchester United. I wouldn't even say delaying. I would say contemplating. And the reason why I say contemplating, not delaying, is because my information is that Manchester United met Maguire in initial talks and they told him that they would be taking their time to determine the best kind of solution, whether to tell him they want to move on or whether to tell him they were coming back with a short-term deal on reduced terms. And that's for Man United to work out because Maguire has indicated that within reason, if a reduced terms contract is offered and he still thinks he's going to play enough, then he would be prepared to take a pay cut. So now it's on Manchester United to say, okay, what is that number? And is it going to be a straight one-year deal? Is it going to potentially be a 1+1? And I don't think Manchester United sensibly can make that offer today without knowing the direction of travel for where this season is going, which is possibly why they're contemplating. Because obviously, if you're coming to Maguire and saying reduced terms and it looks like they're going to get Champions League or European football, Manchester United may say it's worth investing in Maguire and having him as a squad player, and he gives leadership on and off the field. If they got to January, February, and they hit a dip in form and they start to say it's 50-50, if we may get any kind of European football, then you've got less games to deal with. So maybe there's less logic in having Maguire as a squad player when others are going to be playing week in, week out in those Premier League games. So this isn't about a stalling or a delaying. This is about, as far as my information is concerned, Manchester United actually being quite honest with Harry Maguire and saying, we want to start this conversation, and very likely we may offer you something, but we're going to have to wait a little bit to determine what kind of terms are worthwhile for all parties. And that's why I think things for now have gone quiet. Maguire still may get his clarity between now and when the year is out, or now and when the January window is open. But the timeline at the moment is very much taking place on Man United's terms, not Maguire's. And that was stipulated very openly and honestly to Maguire when the initial talks first took place.
Thank you so much for the clarity on that, Ben. I feel like I know exactly what's going on now. So thank you for all the news today and everything that you've kind of got into and the insight you've given us. It's been fantastic. I'm really excited for that Semenyo saga, especially that we got into at the start of the show. Yeah. So thank you for all of your information. Now we've got to end with, because we've got Monday Night Football, Everton, Old Trafford. What's your prediction, Ben?
I think Manchester United will win the game. Everton are never easy, particularly on the road where they tend to play a little bit deeper and they're well organised. But I expect Manchester United to win the game. I think we're in the part of the season now. I know it's not relevant to Everton specifically, but we're in the part of the season where the only having domestic football will really start to pay off, in my opinion. And there's kind of two runs of games for me. The first is Everton away at Crystal Palace, who have got European football, home to West Ham, who are in dreadful form, away at Wolves, who haven't won a game, and home to Bournemouth. And if there is to be 5 games on paper where that poor guy can finally get his hair cut, for me, these might be the 5 games. And I expect them to set the tone over this pre-festive period and very possibly go unbeaten throughout all of the games. But I think Everton, I expect them to win. And my prediction is going to be 2-0. And then as you get into more festive periods, even though everyone is playing games thick and fast, I think the prep and the momentum, if Manchester United can build it between now and those festive periods, is going to give them an advantage when they play sides like Villa and Newcastle, who will have had a lot more games before that because of their European football, all the way through to, say, the Manchester derby in mid-January. So this is a chance for Manchester United, even though it's backhanded because they'd want to be in the Champions League. This is a chance for Manchester United to really build. And I do think they're going to go on a winning run. And my prediction is that that will start in the game against Everton.
We love it. I love that breakdown. I love that we're finishing on such a positive, and I hope you are correct. We'll see. We'll see this time next week. We'll speak again, and hopefully you are right, and we're another game into getting, well, it's the first game because it's 5 wins in a row, getting that haircut. Because we've got to get exactly. 5 wins in a row for that.
I mean, I'd quite like to see him just grow his hair longer and longer and longer and see how long it goes. But I'm sure Manchester United fans are the exact opposite. They just want to never hear about the guy again because it means that they will have won 5 games in a row. I saw actually, by the way, just to give you a little plug, because I don't think you've mentioned your Christmas jumper, I saw he had festive merchandise. And am I right in thinking the United stand also has a Christmas jumper?
You are right in thinking that, Ben. You're doing my job for me. Christmas jumper, link in the description. Go and purchase yours. You've got to get it in this run up to the festive period. With all the festive games that we've got, that Champions League race truly is on. So thank you, Ben, for that. And thank you to everyone for getting involved with all of your comments, all of your questions. Smash a like on the video if you haven't already. Thank you very much, Ben, for all of your insight, and we will see you on the next one.
Look forward to it. Take care, everyone.